Hi, everybody. This is marriage and family therapist John Howard. I'm here with Dr. Stan Tatkin, who is a giant in the world of psychology and couples therapy. You're probably familiar with his book. He's written some incredible books with his work. And he has a new book out, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Stan, thank you so much for joining us on this video class.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me.
So you have been a mentor of mine and of many. You're brilliant. Your ideas have been disrupting and changing our understanding of relationship health in the field of psychology, our approach to couples therapy, and your first book that you wrote for the public, Wired for Love, is just an extraordinary book. And everybody I give it to comes back and says, wow, this is really new. This is really different. This changed my outlook on what's happening in my relationship. Your audiobook, from Sounds True, Your Brain on Love, is just awesome. And
Thank
so
you.
I'm so excited to get into your new book. You've just released a new book. It's called We Do, Saying Yes to a Relationship of Depth and True Connection and Enduring Love. Is that right?
Yes.
And I'm so excited to know, because I know when you put stuff out, it's always innovative. It always has the latest research in it. And so many people watching this class are familiar with your work. They've probably read some of your books before, but some people may not be. So is it okay if I just introduce you briefly and then we'll go ahead and get on with the class?
Sure. Thanks.
Okay. So Dr. Stan Tatkin is widely regarded as one of the top couples therapists in the world. He's been instrumental in helping to bring neuroscience, regulation theory, attachment concepts into couples therapy models. He has a private practice in Calabasas, California, where he has specialized in working with couples for the last 15 years. He's an assistant clinical professor at the UCLA David Geffen School of Medicine in the Department of Family Medicine. He's a former president of the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists and was voted Marriage and Family Educator of the Year by that organization in 2014. He's the founder of PACT, which is a psychobiological approach to couples therapy, and the author of numerous books, including Wired for Love, Wired for Dating, Love and War in Intimate Relationships, and the audio series, Your Brain on Love. So Stan, tell us a little bit about this awesome new book that you've just released.
We Do is a culmination of everything I've been writing, and I think the most comprehensive work to date. This is a book hoping to prevent problems that I see in my practice, with people 10, 20, 30 years down the line. So I am hoping that partners that are considering long-term commitment read this book together so that they can avoid so many of the pitfalls that are avoidable that I see in my clinic.
So let me ask you just a question about that, because when you say it'd be great if partners read this book together,
Yeah.
I absolutely agree. As a couples therapist, it's so great when you see partners reading the same thing and talking about it and maybe even trying exercises. I don't know if you
Right.
have those in the book, but at the same time, it's hard, isn't it, to get two people to read the same thing and really engage at the same time. Books are something that are easy for people to read on their Kindle or just sort of read on their personal alone time. So how do you encourage partners to engage in this new book together?
Well, I try to tell them in the beginning and the middle and the end of the book that this is something that they both have to do, secure functioning, which is what I talk about a great deal. Relationships that are fully collaborative, fully cooperative, fair, just, and sensitive. It has to be done with two people. One person doing this alone does not a secure functioning couple make, right? So hopefully people will take that seriously. Whether they actually read it to each other, that would be a nice thing to do at night, or read it in tandem, doesn't really matter. But there are exercises throughout the book, and these are, I think, fun and interesting and enlightening, and intended to help partners actually launch properly and ensure a happy life together. I mean, this is a big deal, committing to another person and going through life together.
My wife and I used to do that, Stan. She and I would pick a book, and right before sleep, we'd get in bed at night, and I would read to her, she would read to me, and then we sort of talk about it. And unfortunately, what happened is we started picking books that were a little too funny or a little too weird, and it sort of became comedy hour. We would just laugh at some of the stuff we were reading, and it became fun time. But
I think that's great.
but for a while there, we were sort of learning in a more serious manner, trying to pick books that we could really learn from. And I think that's an awesome exercise that you've recommended, where people pick up the book and then they read it with each other and maybe discuss it. And I know for us, we didn't have a lot of time, so we might just read a paragraph or two. And that would be it for the evening. But it was so enriching, and it was nice bonding. And then the next day we could sort of talk about it. It's a really great way to have conversation talking points, but also really be learning at the same time.
Yeah, I love that you and Charlotte do that. I think that's terrific. I really do.
So I have a question for you about the book. My understanding of it is that we're talking about the pre-commitment phase of relationship, right? So this is the phase in between casual dating and lifelong commitment. This is when people know that this is somebody they want to be partners with. They're getting serious about this being a committed relationship. And I think what you're doing with this book is you're sort of pausing people in that moment of life. And you're saying, hey, there's some things you really want to take a look at and some things you really want to think about when you're in that phase before you commit to being lifelong partners and sort of go down that road together. Is that right? Am I understanding that right?
That's correct. I mean, since we, and I say we, PACT people, and I know yourself included, believe that that partners should be fully awake and aware and open with each other and talk realistically outside of the idea of loving each other, of what the meaning of the relationship is, what is the purpose, what's the vision. And we believe that a shared vision is very important, that partners are pointing in the same direction, especially on big ticket items. And if they are not, then they may be dealing with a deal breaker, something that if they really paid attention to it would mean that maybe they can't be together. And so, this is not a bummer. We just want people to keep their eyes open so that the natural human tendency to kick the can down the road doesn't happen, that they work it out, and if they can, take that deal breaker off the table for good so that it doesn't cause problems in the future, because it will. If one partner believes in having children, the other doesn't, and they ignore that, defer that issue, it will get them and cause all sorts of problems, and they won't even know why, but it'll because of that central deal breaker. It'll be because of that.
These are sometimes what we call structural issues, right? Which are patterns that get set up at the very outset of a relationship. And when you're not on the same page, they can be very difficult to overcome and cause sort of cascading problems in the relationship. And I really appreciate, Stan, that you put deal breakers in the book, because it sounds like you're confronting head on something that's uncomfortable to talk about, something that can be painful to talk about. But you and I both know that if people ignore it, the problems that can result are much, much worse. You end up in a relationship 10 years in with 2 kids, you're unhappy, you're not compatible. And it's so much harder at that point to try to extricate yourself from an unfulfilling relationship. And you've spent 10 years, doing something that, could have been done differently. And so even though it's uncomfortable and painful sometimes to confront these differences and issues that could be deal breakers, it's so important. And I'm just really glad that you're encouraging people to do that before they commit, and that you're supporting them to do that. What are some of the ways, Stan, in the book that you support couples to have those very difficult conversations?
Well, we ask that people sit down and have a real conversation about what they think is most important. For instance, what should come first in terms of the highest value, what's the highest priority. And this is not about making something great as opposed to everything else falls by the wayside. We're talking about what is the central important value principle that we're going to hang our everything on. Is it going to be our relationship? Because that will determine how we make decisions. Will it be our work? That will determine how we make decisions. Will it be children? Or will it be self-development? There are a lot of people who go into a relationship. My greatest value is the development of myself. Well, that's fine. There's no problem with that. But if the two of you disagree on your highest value, that's going to create obvious problems because you're going to adjudicate issues according to what is your highest value. So we just ask that people be honest about this, as honest as they can, and think in terms of, what is the central important reason for being together? Why are we doing this? What do we serve? What's our purpose? And so many people don't do this at all. And then they sort of fly by the seat of their pants, and the next thing that comes along that's unkind in life, causes them big problems.
I was going to make a cynical joke, Stan, that our vows are plenty of a substitute for defining real purpose, right? I mean, isn't it enough to just say some nice flowery things to each other once and then move on from there?
Yeah, things you find on the internet. Yeah, that's the reason why it's called we do. We're accustomed to I do. And this speaks to a bigger problem that I've been trying to address, and that is we have been in a culture of merging, of fusion, and then of rabid independence and autonomy, and then issues around codependency. But we've lost this idea that we are, in fact, interdependent animals. And so here we're, moving away from meism and trying to get people toward weism. And that is, I think, coming to terms with our genealogy, our biology. What is our makeup? We're interactional animals that are interdependent. This idea of full independence is nonsense.
It's also important, Stan, isn't it, as a cultural shift? We're at a point in our environmental trajectory where it's important to be sustainable and have a collective mindset around resources and not just, function in a self-centered kind of way. So I think these kinds of concepts, weism, interdependence, et cetera, are incredibly important for relationship health, but now they extend well beyond that into what's really needed from human evolution.
Yes. Well, the Grant study, which is the longest running study, longitudinal study of its kind, started in Harvard, still a Harvard study, of what is the single most key factor in longevity and happiness and health. And, the study still goes on, but the results were well known, a couple of decades ago, and that is it's secure functioning relationships. If you have at least one interdependent relationship where you trust each other hopefully with your lives, and it's reciprocal, you will live longer, be happier, and healthier. As opposed to being in a terrible relationship that will kill you soon, and not having any of these relationships around you that will also kill you soon. So we know that this is, again, part of our nature. Yeah.
Now, going back to your point that it's incredibly important for partners to identify their purpose for being together before they sign up for life together. Is there just one? Is there like one big idea or one big purpose that people land on that they need to feel on the same page with? Or could there be several?
There could be several. I happen to like happen to like going down to the basics, and that is, aside from procreation, which is something that nature is pushing us toward all the time, to mix up the gene pool, that we're a survival unit, that we, like cop car partners, we protect each other and from everybody and everything else. We have each other's backs. We're experts on each other. We maintain radical loyalty and fidelity to our principles so that we don't hurt each other and expose each other to the human condition, which is to be basically self-centered, moody, fickle, be highly influenced by the group. All these things that can make a relationship unreliable, and by the way, a civilization and a society unreliable, that we need shared principles of governance that protect us from each other. And again, that's just understanding human nature.
Now, how do you handle, Stan, the sticky issue of partners having a core difference around the meaning of their relationship? And I'm thinking of some couples that I work with where they don't really want to break up because they're attached to one another,
Yes.
but they don't really have a common, or at least a clear common purpose either.
Right.
And when they talk about their differences, it's easy to feel rejected. It's easy to get your feelings hurt. It's easy to wonder, well, gee, I thought I was good enough, right? I mean, you picked me in the first place. How come now, you're finding all these issues where I'm not good enough moving into the future with you? So these are tricky conversations. How do you help partners navigate that arena of taking things personally, feeling rejected, getting hurt, in order to establish whether they do have a sound foundation to move forward?
Well, that's the whole idea about these conversations is to depersonalize them. This is the one area where both people get to set their terms. This is where both people, to the best of their ability, look at the big issues. We're not talking about whether to paint a house white or gray. We're talking about, big things like religion, like time, like what's that? Health, but also, what do we do for each other? That is worth all the effort, right? Because people are burdensome, people are difficult. So partners ought to be doing things for each other that nobody else would want to do unless they get paid a lot of money. That's an awesome task. So we want people to think of this as, we're in each other's care. We're, basically, tied together at the leg, like a three-legged potato sack race. We move together, and together we're more than we would be if we were alone. We do things together, and that creates some problems, but it also solves a lot of problems as well.
How do you support individuals who struggle to have that we mindset? And I'm thinking of when my wife and I were dating, and we were in that phase of determining whether we should be a couple and move off into the sunset and have a family together, that we had some of those hard conversations. And essentially my position and her position, even though sometimes we'd get our feelings hurt in the process, but essentially we would fall back on the idea that, look, this is not going to work unless we're both satisfied and fulfilled.
Right.
And therefore, I may want some things, but if you don't want the same things, we better find that out now.
Yes.
And sometimes that is a little bit painful. Sometimes it stings. But ultimately, I would find myself saying to her, look, if that is really important to you and you don't think I'm the right partner for it, I would really prefer you go out and find who you think is the right fit for that. Because I don't want to be in a relationship where I'm not valued, right? I mean, it's
Yes.
both self-protective, but it's also generous in terms of wanting the best for others. I think in a more self-centered, individualistic society, we get accustomed to just looking out for ourselves.
That's correct.
And it gets us in relationship trouble because then we end up in situations that we've manipulated, but we're not actually a good fit for.
Right.
So, how do you help individuals who struggle to reach across into their partner's reality and be magnanimous and generous and selfless and say, you know what? I want you to be happy because that's the only way I'm ever going to be happy with you. So let's really be honest about what you're needing. And maybe I'm not the right person, and if I'm not, let's be open-minded to that. I think that's actually quite difficult for many people to do in this day and age. How do you support individuals that struggle to do that?
Well, to think, in a two-person psychological way, many people were raised in a one-person psychological system whereby the family culture was too unfair and too unjust and too insensitive too much of the time. And so they're accustomed to the meism, the I before the we, that it has to be good for me. And if it's not good for you, well, I'm sorry, or I will try to convince you, or I'll try to, whatever, pull you to my side. That doesn't work. People do better when they think in terms of what's good for me and you. So if I want something and you don't, that is bad for me and you. Therefore, we have to bargain. We have to find a way to find a middle ground where we both agree, and we can put all of our energy and all of our resources into those things that we agree on. This emphasizes what we do as opposed to what I do, or what I don't do. This is what we do. This is what we don't do. And people have been doing this since the dawn of civilization. This is the whole idea behind social contract theory, that in order to get people to get along, there has to be a shared mythology. And this shared mythology is based on fairness and justice. It's based on individualism and collectivism. And so here we have a system that is a collectivist idea of mutuality, where we have to work together. It's a team sport, not a solo sport. And so it's not just that I want you to be happy. If you're not happy, I'm not going to be happy. If I'm dragging you along and you start to feel resentful, I'll pay for that. Therefore, it's in my best interest to make sure that on these things we're on the same page, and then let's hash it out with all the other things. Yeah.
And sometimes we forget that, I think, when we're in the passion of a relationship, when we're attaching, when we're maybe a little insecure, or we're just learning how to rely on someone, and that's really nice. It's really difficult, I think, to acknowledge that it may not be good for us to go down the road with this person because of some fundamental incompatibilities. We sort of want to gloss those over and not really look at them. And so let's say, Stan, that a couple reads your book, and that partners are willing to sit down with each other and talk about their core purpose and have this difficult conversation. And let's say that what they discover is that they do have some core differences around what they want from the relationship. That seems like a cataclysmic moment. That seems like a really terrifying moment. And, we just want to plug our ears and go watch Netflix. And, what do you recommend people do if they hit that moment of realizing maybe we're actually not compatible, but we love each other and we're already somewhat attached?
Mm-hmm.
What happens then?
Well, if I were working with those people in my office, I wouldn't let them get away from this deal breaker issue that they're fearful about. There's nothing like a lot of pressure and looking into the abyss to get you to be creative and to rethink things. The only thing is I have to make sure, and people need to make sure, that they're not bending reality in order to avoid loss. That's the big one. We don't want to lose anything. We want to keep everything. So we are inclined as human beings to bend reality in order to make everything fit, even though it doesn't fit. So rather than bend reality, which leads to madness, I think this is a time to two people to deal with their differences. And because they are tied together at this point, they find breaking up very hard to do. That should, create the heat that allows them to give a little, mold a little, to adjust to each other, to bargain if they can. The worst thing they could do is to just pretend as if it doesn't exist. The next worst thing is to one person say okay when they really don't want to say okay.
Right.
That would be the other thing. Yeah.
In other words, breaking up is far down the list of bad things that could happen. And I think you and I are in a position to see that day in and day out, where people come in and they're suffering and they're struggling and they're 10, 20 years down the road and could
Right.
maybe have made some better decisions at an earlier point in their life. But it's so hard in the moment, when you're falling in love and you're attached and you feel secure with someone. So again, I think this book is so important because it supports people to have a difficult confrontation with themselves and with their partner, which is, are we really a good fit? Are we on solid ground? Is this really a recipe for success? Or are we talking ourselves into something? And what I hear you saying is that, they might break up potentially if they realize that they're not compatible, but that's not the worst thing that could happen. And sometimes people think it is when they go into these conversations, but there's so many other things that are worse.
So what's worse is to live a life together that's insecure functioning, which means that all resources are being used for that insecurity. You're not as creative, you're not as happy, you're not as good at what you do. And pretty much development halts, when there is massive amounts of insecurity. Not only that, insecure relationships tend to be threatening. And the threat buildup in itself turns out to be biologically, physiologically toxic. This is why I say, just being in a relationship is no guarantee for health and longevity. If you're in a terrible relationship where there's a lot of acrimony, resentment, where there's a buildup of injustices, that is going to be detrimental to your health and the health of your children if you have children. So nobody wins. People have to think in terms of long-term security. And there is something about secure functioning as an environmental necessity, is that people are taking things off the table that take away resources necessary to be creative, to be autonomous, to be loving people. People who are secure functioning are nicer. They're more collaborative. They're freer to do things they ordinarily wouldn't be able to do. That's the whole point. So taking things, being realistic, we believe that reality is the safest mother. Being realistic and sober with each other, being truthful, being open and honest, transparent, to guarantee each other that the relationship will exist tomorrow. These are all existential issues that allow people to flourish. This is the whole idea. It's not simply surviving, it's thriving. Right?
I mean, what's shocking about what you're saying, Stan, is that you expect people to be mature.
Yes. Yes.
And
secure functioning is being an adult.
And maybe that's too big of an ask. Maybe that's too tall of an order. I mean, again, I'm saying it facetiously because you and I work in this business day in and day out. But I'm just thinking of other people watching this video, learning from you as you're speaking. You're essentially saying, look, for a relationship to work as a long-term committed relationship, people need to be mature. This is one way that I think about it. And you can't cut any corners, and you can't get away with stuff, and you can't avoid stuff. You have to look stuff dead in the eye and say what you think and say what you feel and be honest, and then see what you've got. And
Right.
if you have something that works, then great. And if you don't, you have to acknowledge that, or you're going to be in much worse trouble.
Yes.
That maturity seems to be not as common as we would hope. Right?
Yes.
People get into immature relationships at work, in their personal lives, with their kids, etc. So how does the book help people step into that maturity that helps them take control of their relationship lives?
Well, part of it has to do with our culture. You could think of our time as the highest arc of living, where we are not in danger in our lives. We don't have bombs falling around us. We're not being taken over by another country at this time. We have the luxury and the resources, the money to do all these things and to worry about whether we are with our soulmate. Other people are not so lucky. They get it. They understand that what we're talking about here in terms of secure functioning pair bonding unions is it's not a luxury. It's a necessity. And people who are on the street, we have people who are homeless on the street, they're secure functioning. People who are mentally ill, they're secure functioning. People from all over the world, from different backgrounds, because the conditions are such, they understand that their lives depend on each other's loyalty, they're secure functioning. So this isn't new. This isn't rocket science. This is kind of a grokking, an understanding that two people are better at protecting each other than one person. Two people are better at creating new things than one person. Two people are better at calming each other's existential fears at night than one person or pet rock. I mean, I think the maturity sometimes comes from hard knocks of repetition of making the wrong decisions in relationships, not doing what we're talking about in the book, and then finally learning. Okay, you meet somebody, let's not do this again. We've learned from this. How about if we do that? People will often come to secure functioning just through life's lessons of doing the same thing again and again. So we're trying to do it sooner.
You're accelerating their learning curve.
That's right.
By distilling the collective wisdom of all the couples you've seen and the research that you know is true.
Yeah.
I think I have one last question about the book, Stan. The book focuses on the pre-commitment phase of relationship, right? The hard conversations that you need to have to know if you're on solid ground and you're compatible for a lifelong commitment. But I'm hearing a lot of things as you're talking that seem extremely valuable, even to couples that are already in a committed relationship, or folks starting out that can just begin thinking about these things. So what would you say about the book that makes it a valuable resource for people that are already married, already committed to their partner? How might it help them have a more fulfilling relationship?
Because it's never too late to learn this. It's never too late to learn how the brain works and doesn't work. It's never too late to learn how to be secure functioning. There are chapters here on sex, chapters on step parenting, chapters on, even a process of getting married or dating, and also going through the lifespan together developmentally. So you're right. I mean, this book is geared toward everyone who's in a relationship or wants to be in a relationship or has been in a relationship. This is all about relationship, not even just with a lover, but also with your best friend. It can be applied to your family members. And we talk about people getting together in life as secure functioning partners. Many of them are not necessarily romantic or sexual. Some of them are best friends, dear friends. So we're talking about not just romance. We're talking about safety and security. Safety and security. With this person, I can get refueled emotionally. I can get soothed. I can get my ego boosted up. We think we put all our money on each other, and we help each other be the best we can be, while protecting each other from the vicissitudes of life. That is what we want, not just for couples, but we want for our culture. We want for our society, right? To make a better society.
You mentioned the chapters that focus on specific topics, and those sound really fascinating, and revolve around the topics I think I get the most questions about, which is blended families,
Yes.
second marriages, etc., sex when one person has a higher libido than somebody else, and I think maybe we should do another video, Stan, on the sex chapter
Sure.
alone,
Yeah.
because I think I get the most questions about that. People are so interested to know, hey, if we have different preferences around sex when it comes to the kind of sex or frequency, or what if one person starts going through menopause, loses libido or hormone. I mean, this is a really difficult area for couples to navigate, and I like that you're treating it sort of in this pre-commitment phase where people can really talk about it, but certainly it's valuable for couples that have been together 10 or 20 years,
Right.
and you and I see that a lot. So just to finish up here, Stan, is there anything else that you want to say about your book to help people really understand? I know your first book, not your first because you have many, but Wired for Love is the one I'm thinking of,
Yeah.
where you really just hit it out of the park, and it's been such an incredible resource for people. What can you let people know about this book? Is there anything else we haven't covered that would help them understand how it can help them have a better relationship life?
I think that people understand that what I talk about and what is in the book, even though it's based in real science and research, it's also common sense. And I think people resonate with this material because it makes sense to them. It's not, it's nothing, that's coming down from the mountain on tablets, right? People know that the things talked about in the book is true, but they don't have a lot of strength in narrative purpose, meaning around why it should also be implemented and taken seriously. And that's what I try to do. I try to make this important enough for people to pay attention and to be curious about it, because most everything that happens in these relationships developmentally are predictable. And if they are predictable, then we might want to use that fancy neocortex, frontal cortex, to actually predict and plan and allow for the road ahead. And that's what I hope people will get from this book, and all of the books, but especially this one.
It seems like an incredibly valuable resource, and I just want people to know that your work is extraordinary. It's always cutting edge. There's no reason why everybody shouldn't be rushing out to get this book, and
Thank
not
you.
just read it, but honestly study it and go over it. Your books I've gone over several times. When I recommend them to couples, I say, hey, don't just read it like you read another book. Spend some time with it. Go back into chapters that are meaningful to you. Highlight, talk about it with your partner. In a sense, people should be using the book not just as a read for information, but as a kind of workbook. And so thank you so much for helping to explain
Thank you, John.
what you've created. Again, the book is called We Do: Saying Yes to a Relationship of Depth, True Connection, and Enduring Love. I really love the concept. I think it's incredibly important for people to have these hard conversations around what's really important, what's their core purpose, do they have the same sense of meaning? And you have always been phenomenal in your work about waking people up and trying to open their eyes in the moment to the decisions they're making, because our relationship lives can cut, like you said earlier, they can cut
Yes.
negative and make our life awful, or they can cut positive and make our life wonderful. It's really an essential part of all of our lives. So go to Amazon.com, pick up the book. Are there different formats, Stan? Is it like Kindle, paperback, and
Kindle, paperback? There's no audio as of yet.
okay.
The latest audio has been Relationship RX. But also, if people are interested, we do couples retreats around the country, and in March in Costa Rica. That's a 7-day
Cool.
retreat. And that's another way people can learn this material.
Okay, and we're going to put the links right under the video on this page. So now that you've watched the video, just scroll down to the bottom. You'll see the links right there. One of them is to Amazon and goes straight to the book. And it sounds like there's a Kindle format and a paperback that you can order. And then we'll also put the links down to the PACT Institute, where you talk about the couples retreats and so on. thank you again for
Thank you,
educating
John.
us on what you've written. I know you put a lot of attention into your books and into your work, and I'm sure this one is no different. I can't wait to take a closer look at it myself. Thank you again for being on this class with us.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much.
Okay. And everybody watching, go ahead and pick up the book. If there's a place to comment on the page, let us know what you're learning. Or I'm sure you can interact with Stan on social media or with myself on social media. Let us know what you're learning about the book. We'd be happy to be in conversation with you about it. Take care.